Today I'll be talking about mangroves. Um, so mangroves are basically halophytes, which means that they're trees and shrubs that can live both in salt water and in fresh water, and a mixture of both even. And it basically means that the trees and shrubs that live in these areas have a high salt tolerance. They're not a specific phylum. They're more of a description of certain plants and shrubs that can live under these conditions. So mangroves are angiosperms, which means that they are flowering plants. Um, they usually live in tropical and subtropical shores. At the shoreline, they basically connect the shoreline with the seagrass and coral reef. They're right in between the shoreline and the seagrass and coral reef. Yeah. So it is believed that they originated in the Indo-Malayan region because there are over 80 species of mangroves found here. It is the largest amount of species of mangroves found in the entire world. And the theory of how they got to certain areas like Florida and East Africa, Central and South America, is that basically the propagules, which is basically a fertilized cell of a mangrove, they believe the theory is that it floated with the currents westward, first to India, then to East Africa, and then eastward on to Central and South America. So the importance of mangroves, there's four big reasons why they're very important. First, they buffer land and sea. Second, they act as nurseries. Third, they reclaim land from the sea. And fourth, they prevent runoff or sediment from reaching coral reefs. So firstly, they buffer land from sea. Basically, that means that they protect the coastal regions from erosion, which happens from waves and different types of storms. They also, due to global warming, we have found that levels of water have been rising, and mangroves prevent flooding of seashores and coastal lines. They basically act as a tropical littoral ecosystem that is more dynamic than the sea itself to protect land from erosion and other bad stuff like flooding. Also, even in Florida, when Hurricane Katrina happened, the mayor said that a big reason why it was so devastating was because the mangroves had been cut down. So another importance is that they basically protect areas from really big storms, typhoons, and hurricanes. Mangroves also act as a nursery. They have a really intricate root system, and a lot of juvenile fish stay there. A lot of marine species breed and nurse there, such as shrimp, crab, and fish species. At low tide, the juvenile fish like to hide and escape from predation. The repercussions of basically destroying mangroves and not having this nursery is that there's an economic loss if there aren't any mangroves, because there would be less pelagic fish because it would impact the coral reefs, and so therefore it would impact the fishing industry. And also, if there were no mangroves, there would be a very large part of the food chain would not be there to support other marine life that live in the coral reefs and in the seagrass area. So mangroves also reclaim land. They act as a catalyst in reclaiming the land from seas, and they're unique because water tends to engulf land and tends to flood coastal shores, and so the mangroves help keep the water away. So preventing runoff. Basically, the mangroves trap sediment and runoff from different streams and rivers and keep it from reaching the seagrass and the coral areas. Why sediment is so bad is because it blocks the sunlight in coral reefs and in seagrasses making it hard to have a successful ecosystem because then certain marine plants can't photosynthesize in corals and stuff. Also, mangroves provide nutrients in form of detritus. So, as I already mentioned a little bit about what happens when mangroves are destroyed, basically, if they are destroyed, there will be coastal erosion. The protection against storms is gone, and storms will have a greater impact on certain areas. There's also an economic loss of the fishing industry if there is not an ecological balance of both mangrove, seagrass, and coral reef. And also, if there are no mangroves, then there's a domino chain and it affects both the seagrass and the coral reef because there's too much sediment and it blocks the sunlight, etc. Difficulties experienced by mangroves. Mangroves live in a very difficult habitat. Because they're halophytes, they have to be able to cope with salt. They're also exposed to storms, strong winds, strong sea currents because they are in the ocean or at the coastal shore. Because of this, it's also really difficult for seedlings to establish. They're often submerged underwater, and because of that, when there are high tides, it's very hard to get oxygen circulated through the plant. But because there's low soil and oxygen, there are bacteria that produce toxins. Some have different types of structures that also help with the circulation of oxygen. Some have drop roots, and some have pneumatophores to help gain oxygen to circulate through the plant. Other major threats, though, are basically all man-made. When we reclaim land for construction or agriculture, we tend to destroy mangroves. Pollution tends to destroy mangroves. Port developing, dumping all kinds of waste and debris, deforestation for fuel wood, overharvesting of marine sources, all are things that we do to harm the mangroves. So now with adaptations, there are different aspects of the mangroves that are very unique, such as their roots, pneumatophores, lenticels, propagules, and their methods of salt excretion. So first with their intricate root system. I'm going to start with giving a few examples of different mangroves and explaining their root system. So Rhizophora is a red mangrove. It has prop or stilt roots, basically as the picture on the top right. They extend from the trunk to the ground for support. They excrete salt when absorbing water, and they're closest to the ocean because of these prop stilt roots that can lift the trunk up higher. Secondly, Avicennia. They have breathing roots or pneumatophores, which, as seen in the column, the middle picture, these roots stick out in order for the mangrove to be able to get more oxygen to circulate through the mangrove. Thirdly, Bruguiera has knee or buttress roots. These roots are at the bottom of the column. They basically look like old grandpa's knees, which is very funny. It's a form of pneumatophore because it also tries to increase the intake of oxygen for the mangrove. And drop roots is also a feature of Rhizophora, and I have the small picture right underneath the drop root section. It's quite hard to see, but they're basically just roots, kind of like from the Tarzan movie of what he swings on, except on a mangrove, and they extend from the branches down to the sediment, and they also transport oxygen to the root system for cellular respiration. The reason why they have such intricate root system is because they need it for support. because they live in such a harsh habitat with such strong currents and winds, and they're always submerged, they have to stay strong. Also, they have such different aspects of pneumatophores because they need to assist in aerations. They always need to increase the intake of the oxygen because when they're completely submerged, it's hard to find any other source. Okay, pneumatophores. Basically, these are special vertical roots that stick out from the soil. They usually project around 20 to 30 centimeters. As I said before, they basically increase the intake of oxygen when the mangrove is completely submerged and oxygen starved. The density, size, and number of pneumatophores vary per tree. Some are green because they contain chlorophyll, and a typical mangrove that has pneumatophores would be the Avicennia tree, which has pneumatophores like the pictures below. Lenticels are basically little pores that are found on the bark that cover pneumatophores, stems, and leaves. They further increase gas exchange. They also, a really interesting fact, they prevent water penetration into the parenchyma system during high tide when the mangroves are completely submerged. Propagules is a term used to call a seedling or a potential plant of a new mangrove. It's part of the way mangroves reproduce. It's very interesting because the mangrove is vivipary. Basically, that means that the young plant grows on the parent plant before it actually drops and starts growing into a new mangrove. Different types of mangroves have different types of propagules. As I mentioned before, Rhizophora and Bruguera are both types of red mangroves, and Avicennia is a white mangrove. In the pictures I have, the one on the top right would be a propagule of a Rhizophora, because Rhizophora propagules are usually tend to be really long, as you can see. The one on the bottom right would be Bruguera propagules. They're usually hexagonal angled, and they have a really cool feature because they're basically edges sticking out from them. I don't have the Avicennia propagule in the picture, but they're the smallest propagule, and usually they're easy to find because you see the white flower that it comes with. So salt excretion. Why mangroves are very unique is because they have a way of excreting salt, and that's why they can live in seashores. They filter out salt throughout their roots. They also store extra water in the leaves to compensate for all the salt. They excrete salt from glands in the leaves. And they store salt in bark or older leaves, which carry salt with them when they drop after a period of time. As you can see in the pictures below, those are both pictures that show salt excretion from the glands and the leaves. When there's too much salt on the leaves just basically fall and take the salt with them away from the mangrove. So this is from our field trip to the mangroves. Rhizophora. The characteristics for a rhizophora is proper stilt roots. Prop becomes a stilt root when the roots grow large enough to fully support the trunk off the ground. And also long and large propagules. So here is prop root. Here is stilt roots. And another feature that is for a rhizophora is drop roots, which is seen right here. For Bruguera, the characteristics are knee and buttress roots and red flowers and thick propagules. Here you can see the buttress roots, and here you can see the knee roots. The knee roots and the knee roots are, as I mentioned before, a form of pneumatophore to increase the intake of oxygen. For Avicennia, the characteristics are pneumatophore sticking up from the ground, smallest propagules and flowers, and they're further inland. These are the pneumatophores sticking up from the ground, and this is the white flower that I found that is part of a pneumatophore. This is the zonation.